Good afternoon. My name is Tamara Matthews. I am the Operations Manager with AgSafeBC. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn Mental Wellness and Agriculture session. Today's topic is stress. Before we get started, just want to let you know this session is being recorded and will be available to view on the AgSafe YouTube channel in early April. A quick note about privacy: your cameras and microphones have been disabled for this session. We welcome your questions and comments. However, to maintain privacy, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, not the chat function. Only the host and the speaker will be able to see the questions and they will not appear in the recording. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Andrea Dykshoorn. Andrea is a registered clinical counselor based in Abbotsford. She has over a decade of experience in the social services sector, supporting individuals from diverse backgrounds, and provides counseling to children, youth, adults, couples, and families. Andrea draws from numerous clinical methods in her approach, supports clients with a wide range of concerns. When she's not working, you can often find her hiking with her Doberman Lab and Milo, her pet pygmy goat. Today, Andrea joins us to talk about stress. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, my name is Andrea Dykshoorn, and I am here to chat with you today about stress. Agriculture, as all of you know, is by nature a stressful business, and farmers are some of the toughest people that I have ever met, but even the strongest among us crack sometimes. So hopefully what we'll get today is a bit of an outline of how to identify the signs that we're cracking and how to navigate them. So a little bit of a background. I was born on a family dairy farm and born and raised on a dairy farm, grew up milking cows. I think I've worked for close to 10 different farms over the years, putting myself through school. My parents, grandparents, great-grandparents are all involved in agriculture, so pretty deep roots. I also played in a farmers curling league for 2 years, so I think that gives me a little bit of extra cred. But for about 10 years, I worked in community development in the social services sector before switching in 2020 to counseling. And so I now work as a counselor both on a reserve in Seabird Island in Agassiz, and then also in private practice in Abbotsford. So today we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety. I'm just going to share my screen here and we'll start there. Give me just a moment here. So we're going to talk about navigating stress in agriculture. Starting out with this little cartoon, I find it kind of funny because, as all of you would know, when you're working in agriculture, it's not a 9-to-5 job. We can't just turn it off when we leave work because for most of us, there's no separation between our work life and our home life. And having a break or a vacation often is just a different kind of work, but it's still work and it's still related to the farm. So yeah, with those lacks of breaks and lacks of vacations, and farming is by nature just stressful. And we've had in this past year drought, fire, floods. My family has been hit by all three of those. We had a barn fire in the fall, and a month later the floods, and I know that a lot of you have probably experienced even worse. And so those are some of the main stressors that are at the forefront of everybody's mind right now, but we also have other stress that builds, and one of them that I think of is just the constant threat of critique, external critique of the industry, negative press. And more recently, we have COVID and the isolation that's caused for a lot of us in the farming community. So all kinds of things that contribute to stress. And sometimes the stress is chronic, it doesn't really go away, and other times it's what we would call episodic, or it comes on suddenly. I'm going to share a little bit of a personal example here with the November floods. So you can see in the pictures, this was my experience in November, getting washed off the road in a pickup and having to be rescued by my brother in a tractor. He was driving blind, big ditches on both sides of the road, couldn't see. It was terrifying. I remember after it was more than 36 hours, we were finally able to get the milking parlor up and running. And I was standing in 18 inches of water, milking cows, dumping the milk in I was going to say on the ground, but I couldn't see the ground, dumping the milk into the water. You can see a picture of my brother's house there. The ceiling tiles floated away because the water was that high. And the picture on the right, that's what we did with the calves. They were harbored in my brother's barn office for a week. So hard stuff. It was a terrible week, followed by hundreds of hours of cleanup. And I suspect that some of you had it much worse. So how does stress like this affect us? I'm going to use, well, actually, before I jump into that, anxiety and stress, anxiety is our body's way of preparing us for adversity or for challenges. So anxiety in itself is actually very normal. Everybody experiences it, and it helps us prepare for adversity. But it becomes a problem when anxiety is so intense that it affects our work, or our relationships, or our whole life. And when this happens, a person is experiencing an unusual and a detrimental level of anxiety. So the slide that you see here, this is something that we call the window of tolerance. And if you look at the line that goes through there, the line that goes up and down, this is a line that represents our stress levels. So sometimes we're kind of in the middle, where we're in a place where we can handle it. And sometimes we have spikes where it goes way up. And sometimes there's spikes when it goes way down. But what this diagram shows is this window of tolerance where we want to be is right in the middle. And the middle zone is where we're at when things are going well, when we're able to keep our stress levels in check. When we go up a notch, this is when we're starting to escalate, when our body is starting to prepare for something bad happening, our minds are preparing for threats. And when we hit the red zone, we are on high alert. When we go down to the green zone, that's when it doesn't mean there's no threat. It means that we're starting to withdraw. We're starting to detach. And we're starting to pretend the threat isn't there. So it's a state of a denial almost. And when we go even further down into the blue zone, we are dissociating. We're completely detaching from reality, and we're freezing, essentially. And so when you look at this diagram, we see on the bottom side, the blue and the green. When we're experiencing that, these are signs of depression. And when we are experiencing, when we're in the red or the orange zone, that's where we find anxiety. Okay, so people deal with adversity in different ways. Sometimes people become hyper aroused. That's the red zone, where we're on alert. Our body is preparing for a fight. And sometimes people detach and they freeze and they shut down, and that's depression. So this is sometimes I find this a helpful diagram, and something to think about if you think about yourself and your family and your friends and how people are coping with adversity. Just think of where you are on this spectrum. And again, where we want to be is in the middle. We want to be able to handle those spikes, but we want to be calm enough that we can think and we can navigate them without it having a detrimental effect on us. So how do stress and anxiety affect us? And what should we look for? So we generally say that there's 4 different ways that stress and anxiety affect us. The first would be our physical health. So when we start to see tension, headaches, tightness in our neck, chronic or generalized pain, sometimes it's injury related. Often it's also stress related, and our physical health, stress takes a huge toll on our physical health. Sometimes we have aches and pains. It's just generalized. We don't really know where it is, but we just know we hurt. That can be a warning sign, our body telling us you are starting to feel stress and major stress, and we need to do something about it. Another way that stress and anxiety affects us, affects our emotions. So it could be anger or rage, it could be irritability, it could be sadness and depression, as we talked about before, shutting down. And depression often goes hand in hand with anxiety. And these feelings can be directed inwards, or they can be directed outwards. And so if I think about my family and growing up, good Dutch family, you don't show emotion unless it's positive, a quote unquote positive emotion. And so if you're feeling sad and discouraged and depressed, you don't really talk about it. But it comes out often in anger, and could be anger directed towards family or directed towards animals that we're working with or equipment. And often when that anger is coming out, it's a sign that there's stress, there's something else going on. It's a warning sign. We think about it like a short fuse. When we're seeing a short fuse, it's an indication of high levels of stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety also affect our thoughts. So one of the ways that it affects our thoughts is something we call catastrophizing. So when we start seeing all of the potentially disastrous things that could happen to us. If I think of an example, we had a flood this fall, and this perpetual thought that every fall we're going to get another atmospheric river and we're going to have a major flood and it's going to wipe us out. That would be catastrophizing and getting stuck there, right? Fixation is getting stuck on one possible outcome as well, right? Where we really have the blinders on and we're only looking at one piece. That's another effect of high levels of anxiety. It prevents us from seeing the bigger picture. Another way that anxiety affects our thoughts is through filtering. So only seeing the negatives and no positives. This is something we see very, very often with somebody who is experiencing both anxiety and depression at the same time. There's a lot of negativity and there's a really hard time seeing anything going right, and getting stuck in that place. Another way that stress and anxiety affects us is in our behaviors or our actions. So we see conflict in relationships with kids that are experiencing a lot of stress. There's acting out, both at home or in school. There's a lot of lethargy, so lack of energy, and negativity, constant negativity. These are all signs, behavioral signs of stress and anxiety. And sometimes when we see these signs, we think, okay, snap out of it. We deal with the direct situation, like the conflict. You have one kid getting upset at another kid and we deal with that, but we don't actually look behind it to see where that anger or where that actually those emotions are coming from. And often it can be a sign of stress and anxiety. So I'm going to take a quick break here. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you something that I have found super helpful, both in my own understanding, but also as I work with clients who are trying to understand the effects of stress and anxiety on themselves and on their loved ones. And it's called the hand model of the brain. And this is adapted from somebody named Dr. Dan Siegel. And it's being used both with kids and with adults. So if we take our fist here, and we're going to pretend that this fist is our brain, okay? And this top piece with our fingers, this top piece of our fist, that is the part of our brain that we call the prefrontal cortex. And it's actually the top of our head right here. The top of our brain is the prefrontal cortex. That's this piece. And this top part of our brain is responsible for taking in and synthesizing information. It's responsible for making connections, for thinking and reasoning. It's also flexibility, the ability to see different perspectives. Yeah, that is all located here in this top part of the brain. So really, we could call it our rational brain. And sometimes when we're using this model with kids, we'll call it our upstairs brain. Underneath that, so actually more deeper in our head, in our brain, we have what we call our amygdala. We're gonna say that's our thumb here, and we have our brain stem. Now, our brain stem and our amygdala, these parts develop first in our brain before this piece. And our amygdala, this is where our emotions are stored, our limbic system. So this is, all of our emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, rage. Those are located in our limbic system, which is centered around our amygdala and inside, deeper in our brain. Our brain stem here at the very base, that is where we have our fight, flight, or freeze response. Okay, so that is the part that's we can call our downstairs brain, or some people will label it our animal brain, right? Where that's their instinct, fight, flight, or freeze. So here's our brain. Now, I am curious if anybody, I know you can't really respond to me, but I always ask if people have heard of the expression to flip your lid or to blow your top. Most people have heard of it. It means to kind of lose it, right? To lose control. So if we take our fist and we look at this as our brain, when we flip our lid, this top piece, our prefrontal cortex, the top part of our brain that's responsible for reasoning, flexibility, seeing different perspectives, looking at all different pieces of information. This part of our brain, when we flip our lid, goes offline. It's totally unavailable. And when we flip our lid, this piece is what starts coming out, right? And it's our amygdala, it's our emotions that just come blasting out, and there's nothing to cap it and to keep them under control, and they just come out, right? So it's our emotions and then our fight, flight, or freeze response. And those are the ones that are working in the moment. So when we are experiencing anxiety and stress, it's slowly, if it's stress that's just slowly building over time, this piece may just slowly disengage. When it's something like a fire or a flood, often this piece flips quicker, right? And so when we flip our lid, these are the pieces of our brain that are working: our emotions and our fight, flight, or freeze. So that is how our brain works. Now I'm going to go back to sharing my screen for a second here. And let's see. Oh, sorry, I've got to go. Here we go. So this is a diagram that's essentially saying the same thing that I just explained, talking about flipping our lid, right? So that's all great, but how do we use that to learn how to manage stress? I like this cartoon because it says, yeah, experts say that petting a cat is a good way to reduce stress, but nobody told the cat. So how do we manage stress? Now, if we go back to this model of the brain, when we're stressed, our brain is looking like this. I mean, not actually looking like that, but that's essentially what's happening. This piece is disengaged. And the goal of managing stress is to start bringing this top upstairs brain back online so that it can be, to reactivate it essentially. Right? We want to get this part of the brain back online. So not that we're not feeling these emotions, but that we're feeling these emotions while also being able to look at the bigger picture. Right? And so when we're working to manage stress and anxiety, we are working to bring this part of the brain back online. And how do we do that? Now, my dad, he always says, start with the easy things first. So focus on what you can control. And one of the main things that we can control and that we can work on is building and maintaining a support network. So ask each other how we're doing, right? Make connections, connect with other people. I know this has been super hard during COVID. I think some in the farming community have done it really well, and others have been pretty isolated. Build and maintain your support network. There's also funding available for counseling through AgSafe. And so if you reach out, you can get connected with a counselor, whether it's myself or somebody else. And yeah, make that part of your support network. Talk about what's going on. Also, safety planning. So looking at, okay, what types of adversity are we expecting, and how do we make a plan for it? So if you live in the Fraser Valley, get involved with the city's plans for flood mitigation. Get involved, talk with people, share what you need, right? And do some safety planning. These are all things that we can control. But when we're dealing with things that are beyond our control, like natural disasters, natural disasters, things like that, this stress that comes on suddenly or that just overwhelms us, anything that brings that upstairs brain back online is going to help us to manage our stress. And physical interventions are actually some of the most effective approaches to stress management. And I have seen this time and time again working in the counseling office. And if I'm sitting with somebody who's feeling totally overwhelmed, this happened just an hour and a half ago in the session that I was offering to a client, and their emotions were very elevated. They were feeling overwhelmed, and I sensed they were actually very, very close to a panic attack. And so what do you do in that moment if you find yourself or you find one of your loved ones in that place where they're just totally overwhelmed and these emotions are just flying out and talking is not working? It's physical interventions. Those are what are going to work. And with the client that I worked with just before this presentation, we stopped and we did breathing exercises. And some people I find kind of roll their eyes or chuckle and, oh yeah, breathing, it doesn't work for me. I have found every single time, I'm not even exaggerating, every single time that I've done this in session with a client who's been feeling overwhelmed, it helps. And again, the reason it helps is because it is these physical interventions help bring this part of our brain back online. These physical interventions help us be in the here and now. What happens with anxiety is we get stuck in the future. Depression, we get stuck in the past. But with anxiety, we get stuck in the future. And with both depression and anxiety, whether we're stuck in the future or we're stuck in the past, we need to get this part of our brain back online and be in the present. And that's what we do with physical interventions. Now I can give a personal example here even of how this worked. During the floods, this is a picture of my parents' house, and I had gone there to support them just before the floods came because I knew it was coming. And that first evening, Monday night, we watched as the waters came up and came up further and came up further until the cows were standing in up to 3 feet of water. And the water had flooded the entire crawl space, and it was coming up in the garage, and then it started coming up in the house. And I remember going downstairs to use the washroom just before midnight, and this water, as you can see, was about an inch from hitting the main floor of my parents' house, and it was rising. And I went back down upstairs and I thought, how on earth am I going to sleep as I know this water is coming up? I don't know how high it's going to come up. I don't know if the cows are going to be okay. I don't know. And this part of my brain was going crazy. And it was a very real threat. And what did I do? I actually did breathing exercises. What I usually do with clients is very simple. There's all kinds of breathing exercises, but what I do is 6 seconds breathing in and 8 seconds breathing out. So 6 seconds in and then 8 seconds out. And the reason I choose 6 seconds in and 8 seconds out, it's a fairly long chunk of time, but it helps slow everything down because our mind is racing and our body is tense and we're moving so fast, we need to slow down. So that simple formula, 6 seconds in, 8 seconds out, I did that for probably half an hour and I fell asleep and I woke up and I did more breathing exercises. And honestly, this is what kept me from going crazy that night as the water came up. We were very fortunate that it stopped just shy of hitting the main floor. But yeah, that is how I dealt with that acute stress and anxiety in the moment. And again, I can tell you story after story after story of persons that I've worked with that have found that useful. Breathing exercises can be really helpful when we're facing this acute immediate threat, but they can also be helpful as we're finding this stress that's just compounding, that's perpetual, that's always there, that's not going away. If we notice that our mind is starting to race and that we're feeling tense, doing breathing for it's not going to work if you just do 2 or 3 breaths. You have to do it for, I would say, 3 to 5 minutes. And I'd be willing to place a bet that you would feel better afterwards with the 6 seconds in and 8 seconds out. It helps calm you down. And again, it's because it's bringing that part of your brain back online. So that is one of the most helpful approaches that I've found managing stress, but there's others. And again, physical interventions. We have a fancy word we use as therapists called progressive muscle relaxation, but it's basically just when you tense and then relax different muscle groups in your body. So if I'm sitting in a chair here right now, it's hard to show this over Zoom, but you're sitting in the chair, what you want to do is stretch your legs all the way out as far as you can and point your toes and stretch them and just stretch as far as you can and hold it for a couple of seconds, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, and then you relax it. You relax all of those muscles. And then you want to move up and you stretch your butt muscles or you tense your butt muscles as tight as you can get it. Just tense and hold it. And again, for 5 to 10 seconds, and then release. And then what you do is you arch your back. So stomach forward and arch your back as tight as you can get it. And again, hold for 5, 10 seconds, and then release. And then you want to move to your upper body. So you take your arms and you stretch them out as far as you can. And then first you do your fists, okay, and stretch out. And then after you have those fists, now I want you to point your fingers and stretch even farther and stretch and hold it for 5 to 10 seconds and then release. Okay, and this again is activating different muscle groups that helps remind our body and our mind and our entire system that we're in the present. It brings us back down and it helps this part of the brain come back online so that we can think a little bit more clearly and a little bit more rationally. And people will say, well, I can breathe or I can stretch my muscles, but that doesn't make the situation go away. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make the situation go away. But when you're dealing with that situation with just your emotional brain or your fight, flight, or freeze response, you're not going to have the tools you need to actually navigate it and think it through and to effectively deal with it. We need this part of the brain to work, right? And so that's why these exercises are helpful. Other ones, go for a walk, right? Again, that physical activation, breathing some fresh air and moving your body helps remind you that you're in the present. Stretching can be a great one too. I don't know how many in this farming crowd would do yoga, but many people find that to be helpful as well, stretching, yoga. There's another exercise I do with people that helps, especially when we're experiencing that acute stress, when our brain is racing, our mind's racing in the moment, and we call it the 5 senses exercise. So 5 senses, as you know, are to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. And we'll go through and I'll be sitting in a room with somebody and I'll ask them to point out first 2 things that they see. And so maybe they're looking at, let's say, a thermos that's sitting on the desk, okay? And so they see that and I ask them to describe it. Okay, what color is it? What shape is it? And then another thing that they see. Then we'll move on to 2 things that they hear. So right now in this office, I hear my clock ticking, and it's making that consistent sound, and just a tick, tick. And I am also hearing down the hallway somebody with a drill who's working on something, and it's sporadic. It's not a constant noise. Okay, and you get people to, or you get yourself to talk through 2 things that you hear. Then 2 things that you can taste. Maybe you just ate an orange and you can still kind of taste it, or maybe you're drinking your cup of coffee, and describe that taste for yourself. Right? 2 things that you can touch. So maybe it's a pen sitting here, right? And what does it feel like? Okay, and you describe that. This is a great exercise also for kids when kids are feeling overwhelmed, right? So get the kid to pick up 2 different objects and tell them to describe them to you. Okay? 2 things you can smell, again, describing that. And so for this exercise, again, it helps bring this part of our brain back online, and it helps bring us back into the present so that we can more effectively actually deal with the root of what's causing us stress and anxiety in the first place. Another one that as farmers we have maybe more unique opportunity to lean on is animals, right? So go and give a cow a hug, right? Take the dog for a walk, sit and pet the barn cats, right? Animals can be extremely therapeutic and grounding and calming. And this is why it's bringing that part of our brain back online, right? It's helping us, if we go back to that chart with the stress spiking or going super down into depression, this helps bring us back into that middle zone where we want to be. There's many other physical interventions that work. Some people will run their hands under cold water. Some people will take a cold shower, which I think sounds like torture, but it would work because it brings us back into the present. For individuals who struggle with ADHD, there's a lot of people will use fidget spinners. Some of you have probably seen them before. These can also be effective stress management tools for individuals who don't have ADHD, but are just experiencing stress balls too, something to squeeze, right? And when we're working with kids, if you have children that are experiencing stress or showing signs of not knowing how to cope with stress and anxiety, these are all things that will help bring their upstairs brain back online so that they can actually talk through and express what they're feeling, right? Because when they're so overwhelmed, they're not going to actually be able to tell you what's going on in their world. Yeah. So I was going to see if we could have a discussion as a group about some of the things that have kept you strong and helped you cope. But I've been told that we're not really able to have an interactive presentation at this time. So we'll skip that one for now. But we'll kind of close things out with this quote that I have. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest of souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. That's from Khalil Gibran. He's the author, or actually, strike that. I was going to tell you who he was, but I'm not entirely sure at this point. He's got lots of great quotes, though. And yeah, that's a picture of my dog and my front yard during the flood as it was starting to come down. A beautiful sunset, and that moment just really reminded me of resilience and resilience and that there's hope. So that's really all that I have for today. That's about all that I have today. I want to kind of wrap up though with a reminder, farmers again are so tough and so strong, but sometimes it's okay to not be okay. And that could be a really tough one for this crowd to admit, but it's also super important because when we have the strength to admit that we're not okay and that we're struggling, other people around us also start realizing that it's okay to share when they're not okay. And it's so, so important because that's when we can start to help. So if anybody has follow-up questions, we can have a chat here now, or I have left my phone number and my email address on the screen there. And you're welcome to contact me if you have questions or you want to talk through any of this stuff. I would be more than happy to chat. Oh yeah, thank you again for your time. It was a privilege for me, and also very fun to be able to chat with a crowd that I guess it's more like I'm chatting at as opposed to with, but chatting with a crowd that have a very big soft spot in my heart for the agricultural community. So thank you for this opportunity too.
Thank you, Andrea. That was awesome. On behalf of AgSafeBC and all those attending today, I'd like to thank you, Andrea, for your time and all the great information. If you'd like more information about Andrea, you can visit her website at anewleafwellnesscenter.com. We also invite you to visit our website, agsafebc.ca. We have a wide variety of mental health and safety resources for farmers and ranchers in BC, including mental wellness and agriculture. This concludes our 6-week mental wellness and agriculture series. Thank you to all of our speakers and to all of you who attended. We appreciate you joining us for these sessions. If you know of anyone who might benefit from listening to today's talk or any of the talks that we've had, the recordings will be on the AgSafeBC YouTube channel. Take care and stay safe.